Hello and welcome back to the Sex Talk. Today I am joined with Elle Hawkins, Lcsw, and we are going to talk about, what are we talking about today, Elle?
We are going to be talking about telehealth and online therapy.
The Sex Talk.
The Sex Talk.
I don't know, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it was maybe something that people had somewhere in their periphery, but something happened a couple years ago that then made online therapy and telehealth therapy incredibly popular and really well used. And now, as some people are considering going back to in-person therapy or staying with virtual therapy, we thought it'd be a good idea to kind of explore what are some of the considerations that people might have as they're making those decisions.
Great. Yeah, so I want to just do a little historical on the field of therapy. It's, historically been done in person. And, we live in the digital age now. And when I first opened my practice in 2007, when I was trying to like get clients, and of course, no one knew who I was, and it was difficult. And so I joined some online platforms where people could call in and just get like advice. So it's not actual therapy, it's just like advice. And I got a lot of flack for that. A lot of, people were like, you're doing that. That's not really therapy. It's watering down what you do. I got a lot of that. And then, always like, well, it's helping me build my practice. Plus, I was getting like a lot of unique experience working with people in that capacity. Plus, it was anonymous, which is an interesting thing too, because then people can call and really ask the things that they're really curious about that sometimes people feel nervous about when you're talking to a sex therapist. So that was my sort of foray into starting to work with people not in person. It was mostly on the phone. And then I started doing video calls. If I would travel, I would just be like, well, I'm going to be traveling, so let's do a video call while I'm traveling. So that's kind of how it started for me. But most people in the field were not open to online therapy at all, from my experience. So I got a lot of pushback around it.
Yeah,
Early
that's
days.
so funny. I never knew that about you. I have kind of a similar story where before I was licensed, actually, while I was in school to be a social worker, I was working at Love is Respect, which is part of the National Domestic Violence Hotline. And I was what they would call an advocate. And I would talk to people over the phone or over like chat or text, and it was a little bit of like counseling, definitely psychoeducation,
Yeah.
and a little bit of counseling and providing a lot of support. And so kind of similar where it wasn't therapy necessarily, but it was, really being in connection with someone, really being, in an empathic and supportive space. And I could really see, I mean, it was so effective. And like you mentioned, there was actually some like real benefits to that of people being able to call it anonymously when maybe they didn't feel safe to do that,
Yeah.
to have those conversations otherwise, and also being able to reach out for access when we're talking about love is respect is a lot of times there was abuse happening, and so sometimes people weren't able to leave their homes, and so being able to reach out in those ways and not have to go to services in person provided incredible benefit to them. And so then later when we started doing, in different jobs that I had, different roles that I had, doing some forms of phone therapy or online therapy, I felt very comfortable with it because I'd already seen how impactful that type of support could be. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of benefits to telehealth. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of telehealth, teletherapy, whatever you want to call it, digital video therapy. What's one of the pros, Elle?
Well, one of the pros is that when they've done research, they've actually found that phone therapy, online therapy, and in-person therapy are about the same level of efficacy. There's maybe some variation based on the types of therapy, but in the end, it ended up being pretty negligible because maybe there was some ways that in-person therapy was like slightly more effective, but more people were more likely to show up more consistently and stick with therapy when it was online or on the phone. So they actually ended up having better results, even if the delivery of the therapy in the moment had some very slight benefits. So it ends up being just as effective on net as in person.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. The people are more showing up more. So because it's easier, right? You don't have to drive. You don't have to really take out a day out of your day to go somewhere. Like, so a therapy session is, 45 to 50 minutes plus driving, can be another whole hour in some cities, more in some cities, I guess. And so you're cutting out all of that time and you're able to show up, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even as you were talking, another pro popped up. You were talking about travel, and I was just thinking about the cost of travel, especially with gas prices being so high right now.
Right.
So that's actually just adding on to the cost of therapy, but it's also the cost of time. And
Yeah.
so I know a lot of people who are kind of asking themselves, where can I possibly fit therapy into my schedule? And when we're thinking about, therapy usually is about an hour long, usually like the 50-minute hour is the therapy hour. And when you add on to that commute time, you're looking at maybe a couple hours being taken out of your day. And that can be just really too much for someone who's trying to already balance their work, their family or social life, and then like their own personal habits for like, exercise, eating well, anything like that too, right?
Yeah, we've got such busy lives, and then to ask someone to go to therapy is like a huge commitment. And so this actually makes it a lot easier for people to get the help that they need. Um, the other one is for people that can't access transportation, somebody in a wheelchair where it's a little bit harder, I think for people like that, this is amazing, to be able to just hop onto your computer or your phone and just talk to someone. Um,
Yeah, accessibility is huge. And like you were saying, there might be someone who, has like mobility concerns or has difficulty traveling. On the other hand, there's also people who are maybe living in more remote locations, and they might not have a provider around that's able to like meet the needs that they have, particularly for therapy, right? I mean, I think we see that a lot as sex therapists, is that there might be someone who's in an area that doesn't have a sex therapist within a 2-hour drive for them. And so
yeah,
being able to meet online can be so important. And the other thing that comes up is when we're talking about online therapy or telehealth therapy, we're also talking about things like groups. And so being able to join a group online and being able to find other people who are having similar experiences as you, from all over your state, right? Like that is such a incredible value add and can really help with a sense of isolation. And
right.
it's not something that would necessarily be accessible when it comes to like only being limited to your physical location, to be able to create a group like that.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. So many, for me, there's so many pros for the therapist as well. Mobility for us, cuts down on commute time for us, ability to travel and be nomadic. I think, and so, in terms of self-care for therapists and our own mental health as providers, I think that it gives us a lot of room as well to, be flexible and fluid with where we practice.
Yeah. And I've actually found it to be, I hear a lot of people worrying about online therapy being something where it's like, well, do you really feel as connected with clients? And I've actually found that my sense of connection with clients is almost deepened because we do see into each other's lives. They have met my dog because
Right.
I didn't normally bring my dog into the therapy office, because I was telling someone this, yesterday, where I was like, the only way that he can be a therapy dog is virtual, because he's actually got his own trauma and I would never bring him around anyway,
Funny. Yeah.
um,
Interesting.
but they get to see him, and so they know a little bit more about me, and I get to see their pets, and I've got to meet their kids, and I've got to
Yeah.
see into their life a little bit more, and that really creates a deepened sense of rapport. And what we know about rapport is that that's actually the number one indicator of if someone's going to have a therapeutic experience that feels impactful.
Yeah.
So I actually find the sense of connection to be really wonderful in online therapy in
Yeah.
particular.
I'm really grateful for the shift. I think that people are really like recognizing how valuable it is. And I mean, the numbers don't lie, right? Everybody wants to be in therapy now. Therapy practices are full. Everybody wants to be seeing a therapist because it's so much more accessible. So the numbers don't lie.
Something else that came to mind just now was, thinking about accessibility too, and thinking about couples therapy work or family therapy work when people don't live in the same city. If they live in the same state, or if they live in states that the therapist is licensed in, or if they are able to get like a waiver from their state or something like that, then we're able to have, everybody in the room at the same time, even if we're in different locations.
Yeah.
And so that's been, I think, incredibly helpful, especially for couples who are living separately from one another, but are wanting to feel really connected and wanting to like navigate different things that are coming up. Um,
Right.
and that wouldn't be available just in person, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that we're going to see a lot more legislation change around remote therapy, because right now everything is, we've had a lot of emergency, still, sort of lingering from COVID, allowances for, across state lines, and things of that nature. And I think that we're going to see some shifts, hopefully, fingers crossed, in the way that licensing happens. Currently it's state to state. But with this sort of, ability to interact, I think that we're going to see some shift around that too. At least I hope.
Yeah, and that's such a good thing to point out, and I would really encourage anyone who is oh, here's my dog now that
I was like, there's a little shadow.
um yeah, I would really encourage anybody who's watching this that's like, oh, I feel passionate about that, to like reach out to their state legislation. I do know that the counseling compact just came through, which there's a certain number of states that have joined together that says, if a licensed professional counselor is licensed in this state, then that can also include now these other states where they're working together. I know that the social workers are working on that, and I believe that the psychologists already have that too. So each kind of group of mental health professionals is pushing towards being able more and more to be able to provide services kind of without the state boundaries being what they have been in the past. So that'll just only make online therapy and telehealth therapy, more and more accessible and supportive for folks.
Yeah, I find, yeah, it's already happening. There's a lot of platforms like BetterHelp where they're already doing across state lines. So I'm not sure if they have some other sort of agreement or how that works, but I've definitely noticed that too. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm not sure. I mean, I know I haven't worked with BetterHelp, but I have heard from people that they actually did have to show their driver's license and show like that they were in the state that their therapist was licensed in. So I
Mhm.
don't know if that's something across the board that BetterHelp is doing, but because they are a national company, I'm sure that they and other national companies are really providing a lot of
Yeah, I'm sure they would want
advocacy
that.
too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So anything else that you can think about on the pros? I think, if it comes up, we can talk about it, but let's talk about some of the cons of online therapy.
Yeah. So, one of the things we talked about for a pro of online therapy was the travel time. And in fact, I've actually heard some people say that they appreciate the travel time with in-person therapy because it gives them like a ritual of, okay, now I'm getting myself in the mindset to be with my therapist. Oh, now I'm getting myself transitioned back so that I have some kind of space to process whatever came up in therapy and then feel centered as I move forward with my family or my job or whatever it is that I'm doing. Whereas like online therapy, sometimes people have a tendency to like schedule a meeting right before for work and then have therapy in a meeting right after. And that can feel a little bit tough with transitions. Yeah.
Sure. It's hard to be mindful when you're jumping from one thing to the next. Yeah, absolutely. Another con would be, I was thinking about this earlier, is obviously, it's nice to be in person sometimes. But a lot of people live in crowded homes, or they don't have a quiet place to go do therapy. So coming to the office provides them that reprieve from, whatever, maybe, it's a chaotic home living situation or whatever. It gives them that place to go to, as opposed to when we're doing it online, we're not providing that space for them anymore. And we used to do that so they could come to us. Now it's like you have to find it on your own. You have to fend for yourself. And so I think that that piece of containment that we used to provide for clients is gone. They have to provide it for themselves, which can be a positive too, right? If we're teaching coping skills and we're teaching, like, how to take care of yourself, I think that there's definitely a learning curve around that, and a possibility for clients to develop some skills around that. But it's also something that I miss a little bit sometimes too.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really one that kind of just depends on the person's situation, because I know that being in the comfort of their own home, being able to have their own pet in their lap while they're talking to me, like that can be so regulating and that can be
Yeah,
so
yeah,
supportive and calming, right? But on the other hand, 2 seconds later, their toddler might be knocking on the door, going like "mommy, mommy, mommy" or something,
right,
and so then
right.
so that sense
Or you
of
can hear the kids in the other room.
right. So that
Yeah,
sense of kind of thinking about, for each individual person, right?
yeah,
Is my space going to provide a sense of kind of calm and centeredness that's going to support the therapy process? Or, would going somewhere that's already created the environment for that
yeah,
be there? And like you said, just because someone doesn't have a calm centered space actually doesn't mean that they can't do online therapy. That's a great time to really start with working on boundary setting and kind of like consciously choosing scene setting, which is like, as a sex therapist, we talk about setting context all of the time. And so even talking about setting the context for a therapy session can be really helpful in that. So it's definitely workable, but someone might say, yeah, I would really rather have an oasis for an hour. That would be the most therapeutic for me, is to go somewhere that's already set up for that.
right, right. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, so when I think about in-person therapy, I think that, there's definitely people who would say that they find it a lot harder to concentrate or focus when we're doing online therapy or telehealth, right? We live in a world where we are so connected to our devices. And so when we're using a device for therapy, we can have notifications pop up. Sometimes I hear
Constantly.
email things happening,
Yeah.
and so there really has to be a lot more intention when it comes to online therapy, and especially if you're just doing telehealth therapy, if you're just doing it on the phone, because someone's not looking at you. So it's so easy to start doing other things on your phone when you're talking to your therapist,
Guilty.
or something else, right?
Yeah.
So being aware of that, and some things that can be really helpful is like turning off your notifications, taking off any applications on your desktop or on your phone if you're using it for therapy that are going to be popping up with messages or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I would say I often start or do, like implement grounding activities if I'm noticing that someone's focus seems not to be quite there, right? So there's just a lot more
That's
intention
good.
that has to be there versus coming in, being embodied and in person, in presence with a person, who's gonna notice if you start messing around on your phone or something,
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And that brings up the next thing, the other con that I think that a lot of people are experiencing, post-pandemic is Zoom fatigue,
Mm,
looking at the screen all day. And if you're in meetings all day for work, or you're a therapist who's conducting Zoom, sessions all day long, um, we're actually staring at a blue screen. We're actually looking at a screen, not at a human being. So whatever strain that's causing on our eyes, on our brains, in our bodies, is happening. And I think that, to me, is probably one of the biggest cons of Zoom therapy, is that we're just looking at our screens all day. On the flip side, I will say that that has created um, more reason for looking at, for me at least, I can speak from experience, is looking at my self-care. I know that I can't sit and stare at the computer for 8 hours a day. That's just not something that I can do, or that I'm willing to do. So I've been able to recognize that and set the boundaries around that. So, I think that for me was one of the biggest ones, like, wow, we're actually looking at a blue screen all day long. And what are the effects that that's happening on our bodies, on our mental health, you know?
yeah. Yeah. That while you were talking about kind of Zoom fatigue, there was something that came up for me that's actually a pro for online therapy, or like, Zoom or video therapy, which is that, um, sometimes when I've worked with people and we're on the computer, we'll start talking about something that's really vulnerable. And then they have the option to say, hey, I want to talk about this, but I want to turn off my camera because it just
Ooh,
feels too much to be kind of like observed as this is happening. And what's so beautiful about that is that they're able to turn it off, which means that they're able to get to a place of like more regulation while they're talking about something that's really vulnerable for them. And that's actually one of the most therapeutic things, is when we're talking about something that's really heightened, we're exposing ourselves for being vulnerable, but we're able to do it in a way that we're actually feeling more regulated and centered. That's actually when a lot of healing occurs. And so being able to do that, being able to still be in connection, have them still hear me on the phone as I'm responding to what they're saying. And then when they're ready, to turn the camera back on. And like, what a just a beautiful moment that always is, of self-awareness, of asking for what feels right, and being able to collaborate on connection in a way that feels really good to them. So I do really appreciate that function of,
yeah.
right.
That's a really great. I've had clients with that have high trauma experiences, and they would want to just be on the phone. And as a therapist, of course, my only concern is you don't continue to rely on that as a crutch, that we work towards doing, in person. But yeah, I think it's definitely a safety mechanism for a lot of people. Yeah, good
Yeah.
one. Great.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else, particularly with in person, that comes up as a pro, or as something that someone might really appreciate. We talked about attention. We talked about having the space to like physically arrive and physically leave, as something that are kind of bookends that can be helpful. I don't know. Anything else coming to mind?
Well, I think that we miss getting to see, yeah, like you said, we can see into people's lives like this, but we also miss, like, how does this person walk, how does this person smell, how does this person carry themselves, like, in the world. All we kind of see is this, so it kind of feels a little bit too, two-dimensional, as opposed to we're three-dimensional beings. So we're missing some of that. I don't know what this person actually looks like in real person. Are they 6'1"? Are they 5'1"? Like, that can give us a lot of information as therapists on how they show up in the world. So I think, that's something that, I definitely can see is, something that we miss. And so we're now relying on self-reporting and things like that a little bit more than our
Yeah.
own sort of observation.
Yeah, yeah, because absolutely, because sometimes because people who are watching might say like, well, why does a therapist need to know how you smell? And it's like, well, actually, like if somebody has a particular odor or is walking in a particular way or different things, like that actually might be indicators of like a medical issue that might be compounding some of the therapeutic challenges that are going on. It can be a hygiene issue, which can be related to other mental health issues. And so all of that is information that can give us more of a clearer picture. So you're right, like while we're getting, in some ways, like on one hand, right, someone might be coming in and into an office and I'm noticing their physical traits, but I have no idea that perhaps at home their house is in disarray and that they're just collecting a lot of items in a way that might indicate some kind of a like compulsive or like anxiety that's making them have difficulty releasing things, right? So online I get to see more into their home and learn more about their surroundings, right? But in person, I get to know more about their individual presentation, right?
Yeah. I think, I'm going to counter that with saying you can still get a lot of information. If someone is disheveled, it's going to show up, maybe not as much in their appearance if you can't see like what they're a whole, but it's good. We're relying on different aspects of our senses when we're doing everything online. And I think we're getting better at it because we have to. It's kind of like if your hearing is impaired, your other senses become stronger, right? So I think that is definitely happening for me. I'm noticing other things about people that normally when they're really close to you, sometimes you can't really see it.
So that did bring up one more con with me, because when you were talking about walking, I was like, I actually do see people walking because part of my interventions are embodied. And so often I'll work with clients and we'll get up and stand up together and we'll like do a somatic shakeout, or we'll do big movement and breathing and things like that. But that can be tricky online because when I was working with people in person, I knew the space that I had. I was able to maybe like lay out a yoga mat. We were able to have more range of movement. And, depending on where someone's calling me from, they might not have a lot of, I can't control their physical space, right? And so that just makes us be more creative about like, okay, let's think about the space that you are in. And so now I'm actually going to switch that to a pro of online therapy is once I know the space they're in, then I'm giving them movements and techniques that they're actually able to use in that space, which is where they're going to be doing these things, right? Whereas if I came into my office and I was to say, okay, let's, do some movement and see how that feels and notice how that changes.
You might not transfer, right?
Right. And then they go home and they go, I don't have any space to do that here. Like now I've just given them a tool that's not helpful.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. When we're trying to generalize things, take this home, they actually are already home. So they can do it at home. Yeah.
Right. And actually so much is so actionable too. I'll often invite people to grab a pen and paper and write something down and put it in a place in their house that they're going to be able to see it. And they physically do that during the session, right? Whereas if they were coming in, they'd take it home, they'd have to remember to put it somewhere.
Might be in their purse or in their pocket.
Exactly. So the immediacy of being in the space that they're doing their living and being able to give them interventions that are immediately actionable and are local to where they are is, I think, really
I love it. I think that like more and more it feels like the pros outweigh the cons when it comes to like online digital therapy. There's so many good uses for it, and the immediate connection that the clients are getting I think is really profound too. So I'm excited. For me this is great. I've been trying to do this forever, so
I've been so happy doing online therapy. I have to say I think that there are some things that I do miss about being physically present with people, but the amount of people that I've been able to work with that would not have otherwise been able to get therapy services if I was only doing it in person, it's just so fulfilling to be able to work with someone who's, juggling being a parent, working, navigating finances, all these things that contribute to just like it being so beneficial that I can say, hey, let's find a time that works for you. And you get to be exactly where you are to just show up. Right. And if it's because the baby's napping in the other room and the baby starts crying, you get to walk over there and take care of them and then come back. And
bring the baby with you.
And bring the baby with you. We've definitely had baby sessions for sure.
Yeah.
When we've been doing different movement and stuff, I'm like, okay, let's do some movement, some regulating movement with your baby, right? And
Yeah.
that's been so
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I love it. Very great. Very great stuff.
Yeah. So for anybody watching, hopefully if you've been thinking about whether or not to lean towards online therapy, in person or over the phone, hopefully we've given you some things to think about what's going to be best suited for you.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that is that I think that it's been harder for people to find in-person therapists. I know that some therapists are doing it, but there was a resurgence of COVID and therapists were getting sick again. And so I think therapists are more and more are staying online, and it is becoming harder to find face-to-face therapists. So they're out there if you're looking for them. But if you were on the fence about online therapy, I think we've provided some really great reasons today to give it a shot.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No harm in trying. I heard the phrase, can't hurt might help. So
can't hurt might help. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, as usual, it was so great connecting with you today, Elle, and what another wonderful conversation we were able to have.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy it, and it always gets me thinking about kind of new aspects of this job that I feel just so really fortunate and privileged to be able to engage with. So
yeah, awesome. Well, that was the sex talk.
Sex talk.
How do I stop recording? Here we go.
The Sex Talk.
The Sex Talk.